Hi Rod,
G'day Lisa.
thanks for coming in for a chat.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Let's go through your coaching, your time in Ballarat.
Okay, well I started coaching, goodness me, it's over 30 years ago now. I was a very average athlete, but went out with a young lady who was a very quick sprinter. And if I wanted to stay around with her, I had to run. So I took up sprinting, became what you'd probably call just a good club athlete. But fortunately injury put paid to that. And so I started coaching. And so with a very sort of low coaching knowledge, I started to take on a few athletes. But then a good friend of mine had a son who he didn't want to coach. And so he said to me, would I coach him? And he turned out to be an incredibly good athlete. And I had to keep my knowledge up as he went along, and then got other good athletes. And so from there I started sort of serious coaching. Got a lot of help from people along the way, and and then a young man called Collis, Birmingham, and his brother came along. And of course Collis became an incredibly good athlete, and I was lucky enough to go the journey with him to Beijing. And yes, it's been a great journey.
So talking about some of the athletes that you've coached over the years in Ballarat, who else have you coached?
Well, obviously Collis, Stewart McSweyn came from King Island and came to Ballarat and Clarendon College, and I coached him. Vicky Mitchell came to University of Ballarat back in those days, and she was a 17-year-old, and actually Richard Huggins asked me to take her on, which I was more than happy to do. Then there was also Courtney Scott, and Dewey Yoa was an interesting athlete who I had the pleasure of coaching for some time. And they were sort of some of the leading ones, but I probably over the years I've probably coached 200 Victorian title holders over the years.
So would you classify yourself as a developmental coach or a performance coach or a mixture of both?
I would like to say a mixture of both, and I think this is a problem for people coaching in the country like myself, that obviously the attraction is for athletes to move to metropolitan areas, whether it be Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, whatever. And then it is really hard for you to still keep coaching them in lots of ways, because you're coaching them remotely. They haven't got the squad that you had in Ballarat, for instance. So yeah, it does make it difficult. And to a degree, you do tend to categorise yourself as a development coach. But I would like to think that anyone in the country should still try to be the best they can as a coach, and therefore take their athlete as far as they can without being too pig-headed and say, well, you're mine and I'm not going to let you go.
Yeah, because that's important. As we'll discuss later, is that the athlete has one career when they get to that sub-elite level, whether they want to take that next step, and a coach has many opportunities.
Exactly, and in the end, it's not your career, it's the athlete's career that you should be interested in. It's not all about you, it's about the athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So, well, obviously Collis had great success. What age did you coach Collis up to?
I started coaching Collis when he was 11 and coached him through till he was about 21. Yeah.
So a long time.
My word, it was. And I was very lucky through that period. I had some incredibly good athletes who were also really good friends, and that made the squad just so tight, and they really encouraged each other along. There was my son, of course, Rod Griffin, Mark Cornish, Sam Ellis. They were all very accomplished athletes, and that was a great squad. Corey Proud, of course, too.
Adam Viddick for a while?
Adam Viddick came over from Adelaide for a while. He stayed for a couple of years. I met Adam on a World Uni Cross team that we went to Turin, and when he came back he gave me a call and asked me if I'd coach him, and he came over to Ballarat and was part of the squad.
Fantastic. Courtney Scott?
Yes, Courtney, she came to me when she was about a 14-year-old, and I still coach Courtney now. And Courtney went to World Cross and also to the World Schools Cross, and she loves her running. She's also making a career as a teacher, and she's put that ahead, and I don't blame her for that, because in the end that's going to pay the bills, not running. But she still is quite serious about her athletics and still wants to do well.
Had a bit of a stint there at football, I believe.
Yes, we don't talk about that, but she's just recovering from a fractured ankle which was caused by football. I think she's learnt a lesson.
And Stewart McSweyn, well, there's a story there, isn't there?
Oh, it's a wonderful story. I saw Stewart run when I go over to King Island each year for the 20-mile event, the Imperial 20, and Stewart was running in a schools team, and it was called the McSweyn. I always remember that name. And anyway, his parents sent him to Ballarat and Clarendon College, and he was coached briefly by a guy called Darren Murch because there was a young lad there called Jack Murch at the school, and they were good mates. But then they moved back to Queensland, so Stewart said, would I coach him? Which I did, and I coached him from probably the age of 13 again through to his university days, and coached him through to World Uni Games. But he was then down in Melbourne. It was getting harder, and but I still keep in touch with Stewie on a regular basis, and his folks I catch up with every time I go over to King Island.
Yeah, and his recent runs in the Diamond League and Super Diamond League final.
They've been sensational, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to see that because, Collis and Stewart are two of the fastest 5K runners the country's seen, and it just gives me a lot of pleasure to see them, Collis latterly now, but Stewart still doing so well. It gives me a lot of pleasure.
And Vicky Mitchell.
Yeah, Vic was an interesting one. I coached her all the time she was at uni, and then she went to Butler over in America and won an NCAA title, and so I only coached her for about 4 to 5 years. But they were an interesting 4 to 5 years, and we had some great times. And she won. She broke the Vic steeple record. Was one of the first Victorian steeplechaser to go under 10 minutes. And went on to win the NCAA title, which was another nice little one to do.
I remember back in the day when we used to read things in magazines, not online. I remember seeing a photo of Vicky at the NCAAs, and she had, I think it was bright pink hair at the time. Yeah,
well, you can blame the training group for that. We were out on a run one day. Not me, I was on the bike, but they were the group were thinking of ways they could get sponsorships. And somebody said to Vic, you could always dye your hair something like, and they didn't mention colours, and somebody said pink, and I think we were the catalyst for that happening, I think, unfortunately or fortunately.
Well, it sort of worked for us.
It did.
Media coverage, didn't she?
It certainly did.
And Dewey Ower, he had some successes.
Look, Dewe's probably potentially could have been a 2:10 marathoner or better. Sadly, just wasn't to be. He won the Gold Coast half marathon in 63 minutes and looked as if his career was going to take off, but it didn't. I haven't seen or heard from Dewar for a couple of years now, which is a shame. And I hope he's going well. I hope he did get a full-time job, and I hope his career's going well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was a huge talent, wasn't he?
Oh, massive talent. And look, when you think he was the first Sudanese athlete in any sport to represent Australia. Ran a couple of world crosses. He ran a Chiba Ekiden. He won a national cross title. Won the Gold Coast half, which was the national half. Yeah, had everything going, but wasn't to be.
Well, you could say it wasn't to be, but when you rattle off his achievements, I mean, they're pretty amazing.
It's a pretty fair career. Second at Zatopek as well. So he did put down some great performances, and so he could probably look back and say, I did pretty well, but it irks me that I still think he could have smashed a really good marathon. But we'll never know.
Yeah, life has gotten in the way.
Exactly.
So from there, Rod, you went and become the national junior coach for Athletics Australia.
Yep. It was interesting. I got a phone call from Nicky Frey asking me if I'd be interested in the position. And at first I was a bit daunted. I thought, what's a country coach with no real any science background as a national junior coach? But Nicky said, yes, look, we really would like you to be NJC. And so we were heading overseas, Sandra and I, for a holiday. And so when I got back, I thought, why not? And it must admit, it was probably the best 4 years of my life in lots of ways. I met some wonderful people along the way, some wonderful athletes, and it was really fantastic. Loved every moment of it.
And you got some opportunities to travel with the under-20s?
Yes, to World Juniors, Commonwealth Youth, and just wonderful times. And I learned so much, and I felt a bit daunted by being the only coach that really hadn't represented Australia individually. But they were wonderful people, and we were all still good. We still keep in touch, and I really treasure that time.
And you've you've coached on other international teams as well, haven't you?
Yeah, a couple of Achievers, some World Crosses, World Uni Crosses, World Juniors. Yeah, so I think it's about 13 or 14 teams all up, yeah.
Yeah, so very experienced.
Yeah, I love the team atmosphere, and especially, I suppose I'm biased with distance runners. They're always the best people to be around, and yeah, we've had some great times, and I still keep in touch with most of the people that have been on teams. They've been great.
Yeah, the distance runners can be nice and relaxed and cruisy, can't they?
Yes, they are, and they're more disciplined than some of the others, and yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, had a great time.
So what would be a highlight of your coaching career?
Goodness me, that's hard to say. I suppose actually Doers win in the Gold Coast half, because I'll never forget that, because I was sitting in Poland watching it on a live feed, and anyway, I went down for breakfast the next morning, and everyone was applauding because they'd all got the message that Doer had run, so that made me feel tall. So that was a great one from a personal level, I suppose. But one of the highlights, I suppose, is when you're coaching your own son, and when Matt won the Vic 800 Open title. I think that was one that gave me such a lot of satisfaction, because Matt he'd be the first to say he was just a really good hard trier, and to win that, and when you look at the field he beat that day, it was a pretty fair field. There was a couple of Olympians to be, and a couple of had been Olympians, so he was pretty proud of that, and it was a great satisfaction for your own son to win a Vic Open title.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to coach your own children, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I never coached Matt until he left home. So as a youngster, he was coached by his grandfather. So I only started coaching him really when he left the nest.
So a lot of people have success with the coach, athlete, child kind of combination, don't they?
They do. I think I would have found it hard to coach Matt if he'd have been living at home, because you'd be constantly sort of watching everything. I think it worked well for us when he wasn't, and it worked well to have his grandfather coaching him when he was living at home. So for me it worked well. And I know with Corey Prout, when Colin asked me to coach Corey, he came from the same sort of situation, and yeah, Corey had a pretty fair career as well.
And Matt worked here at Athletics Victoria
for some
time as well.
He did. He loved his time here, but he knew it was time to move on and move into other areas, and he's now with the Real Estate Institute of Victoria.
Let's move on. The topic today that we were going to cover is just not delving right in, but just looking at load management, with the idea to do a coach's workshop a bit later in the year. Okay.
Well, I suppose the question is, what is load? And I find it's one of those things like, what is fartlek? What is threshold running? There's statements that some people like to be very specific about, but I tend to keep it on a bigger load. I think load covers both external and internal forces. So load is not just the training that a coach gives an athlete. That's the easy part as far as I'm concerned. Load is what's happening to people. That it can be broken, I think, into two distinct areas. There's the inherited and natural factors, which are what we call intrinsic, and then there's the external factors. And these are the ones that most of us focus on. But the internal ones, they can be things like what the athlete's anatomy is, how they are built, how their biomech is, all those sort of, and it can be limited by sort of sometimes the physical capability of an athlete. And so those are the sort of inherited factors, the genetic factors, if you like. Then there's the external factors, can be just simple things like sleep. Are they getting enough sleep? What's their diet like? Have they got a poor diet? What are their skin folds? What's their mental health? And that's so important. When you think of, it's not only, we're not only talking here about junior athletes, we're talking about athletes as a whole. So it can be with a senior athlete, is their workload, is their personal life. With a junior athlete, how many exams have they got coming up? All those sorts of issues. Going through puberty. We've got to, so load impacts on all of those things, and they're the things that we've got to, and I find when I'm at training, what I'll do is I find that the perfect time for me to sort of get an idea what's going on in their life. And and we all know with a junior athlete it can change in an hour, but it can change from day to day. So often while they're doing their warm-up, while they're doing their strides, or while they're doing their drills, I'll be just chatting to them individually, just saying, what's happening, what's coming up. And you get a vibe for how they are feeling, and from that you can start to modify their training, because everyone has their training plan in place for the day, but that it can't be set in stone. And I think you've got to sort of pull out of them what's going on, and it's pretty easy to do, I think. And that's part of coaching, I think, and it's in a part that we don't look at enough, is that you've formed that sort of relationship with your athlete, where the athlete is not afraid to tell you how they feel. So too often I think we can be dictatorial as coaches, and you've got to be able to listen to them and bend and modify. I sometimes have play games with them at training, and it's interesting. Sometimes you'll ask the athlete, "Well, what do you want to do tonight?" And often the session they'll pull out to you is harder than what you had in mind. So I always chuckle when that happens. So yeah, those are sort of the things that you can do, and then we get to the physical training load. I'm a big fan of, one of the things that opened my eyes when I took on the NJC role was Ben Raysmith talked to the under-19 group at the time, and he talked a lot about load and how training loads are more to be seen as a constant, that often when you give athletes time off, it's when those highs and lows appear that injuries occur. And so one of the things that I took on with training load was that when I went to one of the early talks when I took on the NJC role was from Ben Raysmith, and Ben is the physio at the AIS and has done a lot of work on training loads, and he talked about a lot of things, and one thing that resonated with me was that training to a certain degree should be a constant, and that most injuries occur in the early stages of your preparation. So when you're building for a season, you can often come in too hard, so you go from this low training base up to a high training base. And that resonated with me, and I started to think about those sorts of things, and that training troughs are where injuries occur. So if you can try and keep your training at a nice even level, then your risk factors become less. He showed graphs that I just thought were fantastic, and I'm a bit of an Excel tragic, so I got those graphs and converted them into Excel and wrote a spreadsheet that became a training diary, plus monitored training loads of the athlete. And a number of coaches now around Australia use that, and they're finding a real handy tool. And so what it is that you try in their downtime, okay, you take the intensity out of the training, but you keep a steady load in there, and then you can just gradually increase that. And I've found that my training injuries have gone down by quite a bit, that often now, you can't, we mentioned Courtney before with her football injury, well, nobody can account for that, but her training load was still the same and would have been fine, but it's, so... Yeah, it's a very nebulous title, is load, and so I find that with the physical training, it's try and keep that level even. When there is an injury, then you gradually bring it back. You don't go shooting back into training hard after a couple of weeks saying, oh, everything feels good, let's go. And there's lots of good documentation out there. The AIS have put out some great stuff on recovery from injury, which I tend to agree, well, I shouldn't say tend to agree with, because it's there and better people than I have written it, and it's a great tool to use, so they're all there and can be used.
So Rod, you must have been managing the load of the likes of Stewart and McSweyn and Collis, Birmingham over the years, because they've got to put in great blocks of training, remain uninjured and go into their senior careers really in an ideal position. Well,
back with those guys, obviously I had none of this information. A lot of this has come to me since I've taken on the NJC role. So back in those days, it was just talking to coaches. Initially, I had some very wise men talk to me about how I should, just monitor athletes. But really, it comes back to your relationship with the athlete. You've got to get that bond of honesty between the two of you, so that Vic was a good example of somebody that was a really tough athlete. She would, if I said to her tonight we're doing X session, she would go and do it, and you could see with her at times that she would do it, but there was something wrong. So you'd pull her off and say, "Hey, are you feeling okay?" And it was just that some athletes, and Vic's not the only one, feel they had to do that session, that it was a sign of weakness if they didn't. And that's where I think you've just got to be so respectful of your athlete as a coach. And with Collis was a young lad who would tell you straight away, he was really mature for his age, and even as a young, he would tell you straight away if he wasn't feeling really good. Stewie the same. Stewie, you could see, he had a twin brother, and the builds of the two of them were so different. And you knew he was going to be a tall lad, but he was only, if anyone can think of Stu, I've got some great photos of him as a youngster. He was tiny, but you knew that growth phase was going to happen because he had big feet but tiny little body. And he got severs, which we'd nursed through. But yeah, so it was a case of you've got to, and I think it's only with time that you pick, your eye picks that, yes, what that athlete's like, and you just nurse them through. And I always had my mantra was that it's better to be underdone and running than absolutely to the minute and on that cusp of injury. And I stand by that to this day. I'd sooner have them underdone and not missing a race than really on the cusp and breaking down. And I still do that now.
Yeah, well, it's worked well for those athletes.
Yeah, I think so. I always stick to the hard easy principle. So if they've had a hard track session, next day's an easy day, whether it be a light run, light track session. I've changed in lots of ways. I can remember when I first started coaching, I was very track focused, so that we would be doing 3-4 track sessions a week, which nobody was getting injured because thankfully my sessions were pretty light. But I soon learnt that you've got to have those hard easies, and we do a lot of easy running during the week. Even down to 400 metres, I still like to see them out doing some easy runs. I always remember Edwin Moses could do an 8k in sub 30 at any time of the year. So yeah, I still believe that a bit of easy running does not hurt at all.
So why do you think load management is so important in these younger athletes?
Well, I just see so many athletes at that age that this is where I think tools like Strava and, well, Strava especially, become dangerous, because a lot of young athletes will look at Strava and see runner X doing 150 k's a week when they're 15 or 16, and you're thinking, do you really need to do that? And I know for a fact that a young athlete that won at Nationals this year does nowhere near that, does about 60 k's, and I think that athlete's destined for great things and won a national title. And I think this is where sometimes they can get hooked into the, more is better, whereas sometimes more is worse, and that they should be listening to their coach, keeping their mileage gentle, just keeping it constant and slowly building each year as you get stronger. And that's exactly what Collis and Stewie did. They just kept it at level, then moved to the next, and we just kept moving it up each year and their bodies accepted it pretty much all the time. Both of them, apart from Stewie with his severs, he didn't really have too many injuries. Collis was just about bulletproof. Courtney had no injury. Duo, bit of a different, he had back troubles, but I think there was a lot of other factors working there, and we had to work through that. And again, was an athlete that thought he had to really try hard for you. He was trying to impress, and we soon sort of worked around that. I think too, you need to build up that support team behind you of a good physio, good massage therapist, good doctor. Have all those people behind you so that you can call on them as soon as you can sort of foretell troubles and get them on the job. I try to get my athletes to get massage regularly and get them into that thought process, and most of them did.
Yeah, going back to the GPS and the Strava, I mean, and I agree with what you said absolutely, but also, it can be a great tool for the coach to keep track of kilometres, and also for the athlete to make sure they don't do too much.
Definitely, and that's what so it's sort of that love you hate you relationship. I love it because I've got a lot of athletes in Melbourne and in Bendigo, and it's great for me to be able to see their session. I can see where they trained, how they trained, and I find it fantastic. It's the young ones that are a little bit impressionable that can see their mates doing other things, and so it's the balance of the two. And you try, and again, it's your job as a coach to say, hey, look, What they do is their business, this is what we're doing, and it's working well for us, so let's stick with it.
So on that note, who do you think determines the load?
Definitely the coach. Definitely. You've got to, if you don't determine the load, then you're going to be in trouble, I believe. You've got to make sure that they're not doing too much. I've got an athlete at the moment who one day got a bit carried away and did a 22k run. This is a 16-year-old. Did he get a barreling from me? And he and his mates, actually, they all spotted the run on Strava, so it was good. Bit of group therapy for him, and he hasn't done that again.
So for the junior coach out there, what's your message to the junior coach in relation to load?
Listen to your athlete, talk to your athlete, build that bond of honesty so that you'll get the athletes that's always sore. You've got to work out what's sore and what's not sore. So build that bond with your athlete. Get them not to be afraid to talk to you. Get them to share in what they're doing. I always ask my athletes, we're actually going through the process at the moment of track season. What do you want to do? It's not what I say is what you're going to do for this track season. You tell me what you want. Let's talk about that then, and let's set some goals and then go from there. And I even go down to probably not. You're a bit more. I suppose I've taken on an 11-year-old this year, which is the youngest athlete I've ever taken on. But I can see a real talent in this person, so I've decided, I'm going to take them through. But for most 13, 14-year-olds, I say, what do you want to do? And let them, so they feel part of what they're doing. It's not Rod telling, hey, you're doing this tonight because you're going to do this on the weekend. It should be a shared relationship. And I think that's something you try and build from the start. You get that honesty, you talk to your athlete. Don't let them be afraid to say to you, why am I doing this? Let them question your training. Because in the end, it makes you think, hey, am I doing something wrong here? So I think that it's building that bond between the two of you that works really well.
And what about for that developmental coach? What are the important things they have to consider as a coach in relation to load?
I think you'll soon know if you've got a really good athlete. Now, I always think to myself, do they need to win every national title going? Do they need to go to every nationals? Do they need to be in every state title? I worked out this year, for instance, that in winter this year, some of my athletes had 27 major meets that they had to attend if they wanted to be in everything. And that's a lot of the private schools have their comps. So I think what you've got to do is just work out what's important, work out with the athlete, hey, what do we really consider as important, and monitor the load around that. As we know, it's very hard. We would all like to have a season that's just all perfect. You've got your build-up phase, you've got your peak phase, you ease down. But in reality, with kids that are at school, it's not that easy. You've really just got to keep a constant load and just try and back them off slightly for the next big one, because I know that a lot of schools comps, my athletes feel more pressure than if they were in a national title. So you've got to be cognizant of those facts too.
And what about the elite coach that are high performance, coaching those elite athletes? How important is load management there?
It's very, very important. And it comes down to the age of the athlete. If it's a senior athlete, it's possibly a bit easier because they can be far more selfish. And so you can go through your whole periodisation, and you can plan your phases, you can plan your races, and it can be very neat and tidy. And for those coaches, yes, you could, but again, try and keep a load that is manageable, keep it working slightly upwards if that's where we're at, and then you can use your peaks and troughs, but you never have major peaks and troughs. And that's where I think the Ben Raysmith graphs and so on really work well. Now with a junior athlete, not quite as simple. But again, there you've probably just got to keep a constant load with little undulations as you work to what could be schools champs or Vic champs or nationals, and even some of the in Ballarat we have our sort of version of APS, which are very important to those kids. They want to do well at them. So yeah, you've got to sort of be cognizant of all those and just work around them. Yep.
the key to managing load is really keeping the athlete at any age uninjured, isn't it? And getting
exactly
those
right. But also,
and training.
Probably one of the things that can often sneak through to the keeper is making sure the athlete lets you know that some of these schools' events are on. Because yes, I know when the Vic All schools are on, I know when the Vics are on. Sometimes I don't know when in Ballarat what they call the Bass is on or what other events. So it's important for them to let you know what their season's looking like at school.
And also other sports.
Exactly too, because a lot of them play footy, soccer, a lot of them umpire. And that's I don't have any issues with that. But let me know when your games are on, because sometimes it can clash with what I want to do. And again too, if they have to go to football umpiring training.
So how do you actually track their load? It's through your spreadsheet that you...
I do it through my spreadsheet. I don't expect 13-year-olds to be, so probably under 15s, I don't expect them to keep the spreadsheet. So that's me doing it myself. And just with, I suppose, experience, I just have learned to know what training. Obviously, I've got my training diaries that go back now 30 years, so I can, and sometimes when I'm wanting a bit of inspiration, I'll go back to old sessions just to revise myself, because as a coach you grow along the way and your sessions change, but sometimes it's nice to go back and go a bit old school at times. So yeah, I go back to those and pull out some old ones. But yeah, with the younger ones I tend to just, it's by feel. You can talk to them and just find out how they're feeling and so on. Yep.
Going back to, looking back over old sessions and planning, who was your mentor in the earlier days? Well,
one of the first coaches that gave me a lot of help was a guy that you've probably never heard of, and that's a guy called Kevin Maple. Kevin was based up in Stawell, and he was a teacher up there, but when I mentioned the athletes that he coached Mark Thompson, and he was nearly an Olympian, Paul Fenn, both world cross runners. Ruth Barton, who actually took on coaching, and Ruth was a low 9 and low 16 5k runner. A guy called Andrew Bristow, who was an incredibly good athlete. Frank Shevlin, who spent most of his years running pros, but those distance runners who know Frank ran the lake in just over 17 minutes and beat Lee Troop. He had this group of athletes that were incredible, and out of a tiny little school in sort of Western Victoria, and he was a great help. Sort of talked to me about how he coached and what his philosophy was, and he was a football coach. But then there's been a lot of other people along the way that have just given me support, and I still, guys like, Richard Huggins has been terrific. Bruce Griffin, I've known Bruce for 30 odd years. Bruce and I are good friends and always happy to help. And then latterly, Gregor Jajewski, we've become very close friends, and again, just a great person to talk to and say, hey, look, it's not working for me, what do you suggest? And I think that's a thing as a coach. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Most coaches, especially in the distance fraternity, are so helpful and are happy to give advice. And it's something you should really use.
So we've gone over using GPS, you use your spreadsheets. Do your athletes or your group use any apps to manage their load?
Well, all of them. Most of my athletes have Garmin watches, so all of them have got Garmin Connect. So we've all hooked in on Garmin Connect, so I can see their training, we can watch their load, they can see things like their heart rates and so on. So yes, is the short and tall answer. They all use at least Garmin Connect and Strava.
And you just keep an eye on that yourself?
Yep, and then once a week the older ones send in their spreadsheets for me to monitor their load. I can pick up any errors in their input if there's anything obvious, because sometimes that'll look as a peak, so I always go to the peaks and have a look at those. And and that's pretty much how we work. My remote athletes, every Sunday I'll talk with them via messenger or email or whatever we need to do to keep in touch, find out how the week's gone, give them their training, get feedback. Are you comfortable with that? Find out if there's anything that'll change it, and we work from there, and that works really well. So I find I use every tool that I can get to talk to all my athletes, even the ones in Ballarat. I'll talk to them on Messenger on a Sunday. How's training gone? How do you feel training's gone this week? Especially with the senior athletes, and give them their sessions for the week. So even though I'll see them during the week, we can, they can get it, see what's in their sessions, and they can sort of get ready for them. Yeah.
So you deliver their sessions a week in advance?
Yes, for the senior athletes. Junior athletes, it's on the day. I have a whiteboard that I take to training that has the different sessions for the different athletes on it. And there's usually a charge up to the whiteboard to see what they're going to do. And what I do just to play a game, I never put the names against the session. I just have group 1, group 2, and how many groups I need. And so there's always then a bit of a guessing game as to which group they're in. So that just makes for a bit of interest, yeah.
And how many have you got in your squad now?
About 25 to 30. Some of those are remote, so that it sounds a lot, but I find now I can cope with that amount. But at training of a night, probably about 16 to 18 of a night. I'm very lucky at the moment. I've got some really good senior athletes that are really good mentors and good role models to my juniors, and that's something that I've always been lucky that I've never been what you would call a junior coach. I've always had athletes in a great age range. At the moment I've got my eldest athletes in their 60s, my youngest athletes 11. So that's a fantastic range to have, because the junior sees the senior behave. So I've been very blessed that I've never had any athletes that have really displayed bad behaviour, and I'm sure that's because of the role models that my senior athletes have displayed, and they've been fantastic to the juniors, and they're great encouragement. I've got a lady who's taken it up in her 40s and is quite an accomplished athlete. The younger athletes love her because they see how hard she works to achieve what she's doing, and she's a great supporter at training. She'll be encouraging them, and you'll hear them encouraging her, and I just think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great environment.
It is. It's a really positive environment. You hear them when I come into training. A lot of them will admit that you just hear laughing, joking. You know that they're looking forward to their training session. It's good. Really good.
Talking about your training sessions, are you mentoring any coaches yourself at the moment?
I am. I'm mentoring a young lad that I used to coach, Will Barber, and Will's displaying all the attributes of going to be a very good coach. And he's actually fantastic for me because I'm pretty old and decrepit now, and so he's great for me for just demonstrating drills, to demonstrate a lot of the things that I'd like him to, and I get him to work with some of the younger athletes. I wish I could still get him to run seriously because Will's still got a great ability. But yeah, and I'm also helping and encouraging a couple of coaches around the countryside too. Yeah, so yeah, I'm enjoying that.
So where to next for you? What are your plans for coaching?
I really don't know. I'm pretty excited about the group I've got at the moment, and I think there's a lot of talent within that group. And so, for me, I'm just happy to go along for the ride. I just enjoy the company that I've been lucky enough to meet. I love coming down to Melbourne to meet up with the coaches here, and I love going interstate to catch up with the friends I've made there. So for me, I don't like to think too much ahead. I just enjoy whatever's going to happen, and it's been a great ride, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I recommend it to anybody.
So anyone thinking about becoming a coach, how would you advise they go about it? What are the important things?
Well, I think obviously do the coaching courses. At least get some background knowledge. Do a formal course. I think also then talk to other coaches and talk to a range of coaches, and then try to build a little squad. I think I see too many coaches do coaching courses and then don't go and put a squad together. They might have only done it to coach one or two people, and I see that as sad. Try and put a squad together, because in the end the sport needs more athletes, it needs more coaches. So if you get your coaching ticket, start to build your squad, start to put it together. Don't be afraid to ask another coach, hey look, I've got this group of 4 athletes, I'm just a bit scared how I go about giving their programs and whatever. You'll get help. you will get help. I'm happy to help anyone.
Well, thanks for coming in for a chat today, Rod. Congratulations on all your coaching up to date.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And look forward to continuing our chats and and seeing you around the track.
Thank you, Lisa.